Right now, as you are watching this video, a man wanted by the Mexican government for torture, evidence tampering, and helping start up multiple cartels in Mexico, living freely in a luxury apartment in Tel Aviv, Israel. He is not hiding. He is not on the run. He is giving interviews to Israeli magazines, running a restaurant, and walking the beaches of the Mediterranean while people suffer because of what he started in Mexico. But here is where this story stops being just another corrupt Mexican official story and becomes something far more dangerous. Tomás Zerón de Lucio was not some low-level dirty cop. He ran Mexico's version of the FBI. He was personally appointed by the President of Mexico, and according to investigators, he was the man sitting in the room when they decided what story the public was going to get about those 43 missing students. He controlled the entire investigation. He decided what evidence got found, what evidence got planted, and who got tortured into confessing. And when a new government came into power and started getting too close to the truth, he used his deep ties to the Israeli intelligence and surveillance industry to vanish overnight, straight into a country that has no extradition treaty with Mexico and apparently no problem protecting a man accused of crimes against humanity. But now people are asking a question that goes even deeper than that. Because Zerón was not just connected to Israel through geography. This man spent years funneling $300 million in Mexican government money directly into Israeli surveillance companies. He built personal friendships with the founders and distributors of the most powerful spyware on Earth. And after the cover-up of the 43 students was exposed, those very same Israeli business connections are the ones who reportedly helped him escape. Some investigators and journalists tracking this case have openly stated they believe Israel was not just a safe house. They believe those connections were active. That this was not a man running from justice, but a man being protected by a network that had something to gain from Mexico's most powerful secret staying buried. Whether you believe that or not, the facts on the ground are undeniable. 43 young men disappeared. The lead investigator planted evidence, ran a torture program, and fled. And 11 years later, nobody has been held accountable. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how one man held an entire country's truth hostage, and how a foreign government may have helped him keep it that way. To understand who Tomás Zerón really is, you have to understand the world he came up in. Mexico in the 2000s was a country where the line between law enforcement and organized crime was not a line at all. It was a door that swung both ways. Presidents needed crime networks to fund operations and control territory. Cartels needed government officials to look the other way. And the people who moved between those two worlds, the intelligence chiefs, the federal police coordinators, the directors of criminal investigation, those were the most powerful people in Mexico. Not the politicians, not the generals, the fixers, the men who knew where the bodies were and who put them there. Zerón was that guy. He was not just the head of the investigation into the 43 students. He was the system. He was how Mexico's federal government operated in the shadows for over a decade. And the night those students disappeared in Iguala, Guerrero, on September 26th of 2014, Zerón's job was not to find them. His job was to make sure the real story never came out. What the real story actually involves: a military heroin operation, a missing bus, and a decision made at the highest levels of the Mexican presidency, is something that should have sent shockwaves around the world. Instead, it was buried, and Zerón was the shovel. Let us go back to July 7th, 1962. That is the day Tomás Zerón de Lucio is born in Mexico City. He is not connected to organized crime from birth. He is not cartel royalty. He is an ordinary kid who goes to school, graduates from the National Polytechnic Institute with a degree in industrial administration, and later earns a master's degree in criminal sciences. On paper, he looked like exactly what Mexico needed: an educated, professional law enforcement official in a country that desperately needed them. He starts climbing the ladder through the Federal Preventive Police under President Felipe Calderón, who launched Mexico's famous war on drugs in 2006. This is where Zerón gets his first real taste of the intelligence world. He is working inside the Secretariat of Public Security, learning how information is collected, how surveillance works, and most importantly, how evidence can be shaped and managed to tell whatever story the government needs told. This is important because everything Zerón does later is rooted in these skills. He did not become a criminal overnight. He was trained to be exactly what he became. But his time under Calderón ends with a controversy. In May of 2007, a major armed attack goes down in Cananea, Sonora. Armed commandos essentially take over a section of the city and attack a police barracks. Multiple people are killed. The investigation finds that officials under Zerón's command allowed the attack to happen without intervening. He gets dismissed, and instead of that being the end of his career, it becomes a reset. He lands softly as the coordinator of investigation and analysis for the State Attorney General's office in Estado de Mexico. Because in Mexico, powerful men do not fall. They just move sideways. This is where the next chapter begins. And this is where Zerón is going to meet the man who will change everything for him. The Estado de Mexico is Enrique Peña Nieto's territory. Peña Nieto is the governor there before he becomes president, and he is already building the political machine that will carry him to the top. Zerón plugs directly into that machine. He becomes a key figure in the state's law enforcement and intelligence apparatus, and he and Peña Nieto become close. Not just professionally close. According to journalist Anabel Hernandez, whose book on the Ayotzinapa case is considered the most comprehensive account of the cover-up, Zerón was someone who knew everything about the president. That is the kind of relationship where loyalty goes in both directions and the debts are not paid in cash. When Peña Nieto wins the presidential election in 2012 and takes office, Zerón moves with him to the federal level. In September of 2013, he is appointed Director-in-Chief of the Criminal Investigation Agency, the AIC, by the Attorney General Jesus Murillo Caram. The AIC is Mexico's closest equivalent to the FBI. Zerón now runs all federal criminal investigations in the country. He has the power to build cases, kill cases, surveil citizens, and control narratives. He is 31 months into that job when the night of Iguala happens. But here is what you need to know about what Zerón was already doing before those students disappeared, because this is where the Israel connection starts. Almost immediately after taking the AIC job, Zerón becomes the central figure in a massive government deal to purchase surveillance technology from an Israeli company called the NSO Group. The NSO Group makes Pegasus, a spyware so powerful that once it is installed on a phone, the operator can read every message, activate the camera and microphone without the user knowing, and track every movement in real time. This is not consumer software. This is military-grade intelligence weaponry. Between 2012 and 2018, Mexico spends roughly $300 million in government contracts with NSO Group. A significant portion of those contracts flow through Zerón during his time as AIC director. And according to leaked emails later obtained by WikiLeaks and the investigative journalism consortium Forbidden Stories, Zerón is identified as the definitive buyer, the man signing off on the purchases and building the personal relationships with NSO's distributors and executives. He develops a close partnership with a man named Uri Emanuel Ansbacher, NSO Group's representative in Mexico. The two men reportedly arrange a kickback structure on the purchase deals. Zerón is not just buying surveillance tools, he is getting paid to buy them. And through Ansbacher, Zerón builds a web of Israeli business relationships. Cybersecurity executives, tech entrepreneurs, intelligence contractors. He develops ties to a man named Tal Hanan, who runs a secretive Israeli group known as Team Jorge, which specializes in hacking, disinformation, and the creation of fake digital identities to manipulate public opinion. These are not casual friendships. These are professional alliances built around money, technology, and the kind of information that makes powerful people untouchable. And when the crisis comes for Zerón, those alliances will be the only thing that saves him. September 26, 2014. 43 male students from the Ayotzinapa Rural Teachers College in the state of Guerrero commandeer several buses and travel toward the city of Iguala. These are not dangerous kids. They are student teachers from a rural school, a group that had a tradition of borrowing buses for transportation to protests and demonstrations, something that was common and had been done many times before. They are on their way to join a march in Mexico City, commemorating a student massacre from 1968. They never make it. Local police intercept them on the roads around Iguala. What happens next is something that a decade of investigations have only partially uncovered, because the people who know the full truth have either been murdered, imprisoned, or disappeared themselves. What is confirmed is this: the police pull the students off the buses. They detain them. And at some point during that night, the 43 students are handed over and they vanish. 6 people are killed during the confrontation, including 3 students and several bystanders. 40 are wounded. And 43 young men, most of them teenagers and early 20s, are gone. Now here is where Zerón enters the picture directly. As director of the AIC, he is the man in charge of the federal investigation. He arrives with resources, authority, and a mandate from the president himself. But investigators and later independent experts would conclude that Zerón did not arrive to find the truth. He arrived to bury it. The theory that independent investigators, journalists, and ultimately Mexico's own Truth Commission would piece together is this: the students unknowingly commandeered one of the buses that the Guerreros Unidos cartel was using to smuggle heroin from Iguala to Chicago, Illinois. DEA wiretap evidence obtained years later during a separate drug trafficking investigation showed intercepted text messages between cartel members confirming the attack happened because of the bus. One intercepted message stated that the cartel leader Cedronio Casarubias had accepted the 43 students after local police handed them over. What happened after that, where they were taken, how they died, where the bodies are, is the information that has never been fully extracted. But the evidence also points to something even more explosive than a cartel drug deal gone wrong. According to Mexico's own Truth Commission report, released in 2022, at least 6 of the 43 students were kept alive for several days after their abduction in a warehouse. And according to the report, those 6 students were ultimately turned over to the local commander of the 27th Infantry Battalion of the Mexican Army, who ordered their execution. The military, the Federal Armed Forces of Mexico. Not just local cops and cartel members, the Army. This is what Zerón was being asked to cover up. Not just a cartel kidnapping, a state crime. A crime that went all the way up to the federal level, with potential knowledge at the presidential level. Zerón gets to work. His investigators round up suspects, low-level cartel figures, local police officers, small-time criminals, and over the next several months, those suspects are subjected to a systematic torture program. Electric shocks, beatings, attempted suffocation, sexual assault, psychological torture. The United Nations would later examine 63 cases out of the 129 people prosecuted and find evidence of torture in 51 of them. 40 separate videos documenting the torture were eventually discovered, some of which feature Zerón's voice. These were not rogue officers losing their tempers. This was a coordinated intelligence operation designed to extract scripted confessions that would support a pre-written story. That story became known as the historical truth. Zerón and Attorney General Murillo Karam presented at a press conference in November of 2014. The government's version: local police handed the students to Guerreros Unidos cartel members, who took them to a garbage dump in the nearby town of Cocula, shot them, burned their bodies in a bonfire fueled by tires and wood for hours, collected the ashes and bone fragments in plastic bags, and threw them into the San Juan River. Case closed. Local criminals. No federal involvement, no military, no president. But there was a problem with this story. Multiple problems, actually. The first crack came from scientists. An independent group of forensic experts later proved that burning 43 human bodies completely in an outdoor garbage dump was physically impossible. The temperature needed to reduce bodies to ash cannot be reached in an open-air fire. The bones would have remained. Yet no bones were found at the dump. The burn story was a lie. The second crack came from the river. Zerón's team presented what they claimed was their key piece of physical evidence: plastic bags found in the San Juan River containing charred bone fragments that were later matched to one student, Alexander Mora Venancio. This was the only confirmed death in the entire case. And it is the piece of evidence that would ultimately destroy Zerón's entire career. Independent investigators from the GIEI, an international expert group brought in under pressure from families and human rights organizations, obtained video footage from the days surrounding the discovery of those bags. What the footage showed was this: the day before the bags were officially discovered, Tomás Zerón and a team of investigators were seen at the San Juan River, conducting an illegal and unrecorded operation at the exact location where the bags would be found the following day. No legal authorization, no record in any official file, no independent witnesses. Despite Zerón's later claim that UN officials had been present, he physically went to the river the night before. He staged the scene. And then the next day, his investigators found the evidence. The bone fragments matched Alexander Mora Venancio. The evidence was real. The crime scene was fake. Someone had already collected that evidence somewhere else, and Zerón planted it to make the garbage dump story look credible. When the GIEI released its findings in September of 2015, the official narrative collapsed. Independent investigators said the burn story was scientifically impossible. The crime scene had been staged. Suspects had been tortured. The entire historical truth was a fabrication. Mexico was on fire. Thousands marched. International organizations condemned the government. Families of the 43 refused to accept the official version and have been marching in Mexico City on the 26th of every single month ever since. By the time 2016 came around, the Attorney General's office's own internal inspector had confirmed that Zerón had violated the victim's right to the truth and likely tampered with evidence. That report was buried. Peña Nieto himself refused to release it. And instead of being arrested or investigated, Zerón resigned from the AIC in September of 2016 and was immediately appointed by Peña Nieto to the National Security Council, to a position inside the president's own office. That is not how you treat a disgraced investigator. That is how you protect someone who knows where every body is buried, including the ones that point back to you. For 2 more years, while Peña Nieto remains in power, Zerón is untouchable. Then in 2018, things change. Andrés Manuel López Obrador, known as AMLO, wins the presidential election on a platform of ending corruption and impunity. He takes office in December of 2018 and immediately announces the Ayotzinapa case will be reopened. A special prosecutor named Omar Gomez Trejo is appointed specifically to investigate the cover-up. A truth commission is created. The families are brought into the process for the first time. Zerón reads the room immediately. In August of 2019, his government-provided security detail is recalled. His protection is gone. And within weeks, Zerón is gone too. He leaves Mexico quietly, first traveling to Canada, where he reportedly spends roughly 2 weeks. Then he boards a flight to Israel, the country where his most trusted business partners live, the country with which Mexico has no extradition treaty, the country that, as of this video, still has not sent him back. In March of 2020, a Mexican judge issues a formal arrest warrant for Zerón, charging him with alleged misconduct in the Ayotzinapa investigation. In April of 2021, a second warrant is issued for the torture of Felipe Rodriguez Salgado, also known as El Cepillo, the alleged Guerreros Unidos leader, who was forced to confess on video while hooded and handcuffed. An Interpol red notice goes out worldwide. Mexico formally submits an extradition request to Israel. Israel does not act on it. According to reporting from the New York Times in 2021, Israeli officials privately indicated that the delay in extraditing Zerón was connected to Mexico's support for UN human rights investigations, critical of Israel's treatment of Palestinians. In other words, Zerón was being used as a diplomatic bargaining chip. A man wanted for helping cover up the murder of 43 students was being protected because of a vote at the United Nations. Meanwhile, Zerón is living comfortably in Tel Aviv. According to an Israeli tech publication, he spends months residing in a luxury apartment in a residential tower owned by David Avital, an Israeli businessman with major stakes in Rayzone, a cyber surveillance company that develops military-grade cell phone tracking software. The man who helped cover up the disappearance of 43 students is being housed by an Israeli tech executive who runs a surveillance company. That is not a coincidence. That is a network protecting its own. And then in 2022, something wild happens. Mexico's Undersecretary for Human Rights, Alejandro Encinas, gets on a plane to Tel Aviv. He is going to meet with Zerón in person to offer him a deal: cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. The meeting takes place over nearly 3 hours at a Greek restaurant in North Tel Aviv. Encinas flies across the world, sits down with the man the Mexican government considers one of the chief architects of a state crime, and offers him a way out. But Zerón already knows the meeting is being recorded. A 3-person surveillance team he had personally arranged is set up in the restaurant before Encinas even arrives. Cameras and microphones placed at the perfect angle to capture everything. The man who built his career running surveillance operations is now running one on the Mexican government's own representative. Zerón secretly records the entire conversation, including Encinas, apparently downplaying the seriousness of the charges against him in his desperation to secure cooperation. Zerón rejects the deal. He is not cooperating. He is not coming back. And now he has leverage. After the recording story breaks, the picture of who Zerón really is comes into even sharper focus. This is not a man who stumbled into a cover-up out of loyalty to a president. This is a man who had been building an international intelligence network for years, buying surveillance tools, cultivating relationships with Israeli tech companies and intelligence contractors, and positioning himself so that if things ever went bad in Mexico, he would have somewhere to go and people to protect him. After he lands in Israel, a public relations campaign quietly begins on social media. Fake accounts start appearing, profiles with normal-looking names and photographs, posting articles and videos praising Zerón as a hero, crediting him with helping capture El Chapo, calling him a victim of political persecution. Investigators later connected this campaign to Team Jorge, the Israeli disinformation for hire operation run by Tal Hanan, the same contractor Zerón had ties to through his surveillance industry network. Artificial intelligence was being used to build fake social media identities to rehabilitate the reputation of a man accused of covering up a massacre. And it appears someone paid for it. Zerón himself eventually gives interviews. In 2023, an Israeli magazine publishes an exclusive profile on him. He talks about his childhood, his career, his life in Tel Aviv. He calls himself a culinary consultant. He says he maintains a healthy lifestyle, listens to music, and walks through historical sites. He describes the charges against him as political persecution. He insists his historical truth was accurate. He sounds by all accounts like a man who does not believe he will ever face justice, because he probably will not. Here is where things stand right now. Mexico's own Truth Commission has declared the disappearance of the 43 students a state crime. Arrest warrants have been issued for military commanders, federal police officers, state officials, and local police. Mexico's former Attorney General Jesus Murillo Caram, the man who stood next to Zerón at the historical Truth Press conference, was arrested in 2022 and ordered to stand trial for forced disappearance and torture. The former Guerreros Unidos cartel members at the center of the heroin trafficking operation have been convicted in federal courts in the United States on drug charges. 3 of the 43 students have been confirmed dead through DNA evidence. The other 40 have no confirmed fate. And Tomás Zerón, the man who ran the investigation, planted the evidence, ran the torture program, fled to a foreign country, got housed by a surveillance tech billionaire, secretly recorded a senior Mexican official, and launched an AI-powered disinformation campaign to clean his name, he is still there. The extradition request remains unresolved. The fathers of some of the missing students died waiting for answers, taken by diabetes, heart attacks, grief. The families march on the 26th of every month in Mexico City. And in Tel Aviv, a man walks on the beach, eats at restaurants, and calls himself persecuted. What happened on the night of September 26, 2014 in Iguala, Guerrero, what really happened, may never be fully known. Not because the evidence does not exist, not because the witnesses are all gone, but because the man who was supposed to find the truth decided his job was to erase it. And he built his escape route long before he ever needed it. That is the story of Tomás Zerón de Lucio, Mexico's top cop, Israel's most protected fugitive, and the man who holds the answers that 43 families have been waiting over a decade to hear. And that is what makes this case different from every other cartel story you have ever seen. Because most corruption stories end with someone getting arrested, someone getting killed, or someone disappearing. This one ends with the man in charge of the crime, living openly in a foreign country, protected by a government, connected to a surveillance empire, and actively working to manage his own reputation while the victims' families grow old, waiting for a phone call that never comes. The fact that Israel has not extradited Zerón despite multiple formal requests, a presidential letter, an Interpol red notice, and nearly 6 years of diplomatic pressure tells you something about how this world actually operates. When money and intelligence networks and geopolitical interests are involved, justice does not just get delayed. It gets outsourced to whoever has the most leverage in the room. The 43 students of Ayotzinapa were not drug traffickers. They were not cartel members. They were broke kids from a rural teacher's college who got on the wrong buses on the wrong night. And the system that was supposed to protect them first allowed them to be taken, then tried to burn their memory along with their bodies, then sent the man responsible to one of the most surveillance-connected countries on Earth. If you made it to the end of this video, you now know more about what really happened to those 43 students than most people who have followed this story for years. subscribe, because we cover the stories that nobody else is willing to touch. And if you want to understand how cartels, governments, and intelligence networks operate as one single machine, you are in the right place.